so because so huge.
Yeah. Let's begin with, actually, let's begin with Bernie Sanders.
Sure.
You're a progressive. I'm sure you're ecstatic over what he's doing. Why do you think he's been as successful as he's been?
I think Bernie has we've seen it here for decades in Vermont. He really connects with voters in a very powerful and deep way. When people decide they're going to support Bernie, it's not a decision you make lightly. And people, you find here in Vermont very deep support. He's one of the most trusted senators of any senator in the country, and one of our most popular politicians. And I think now you're seeing other people in the country waking up and turning on the news and going,
"Yeah, I'm doing
wow,
good."
I never heard anybody talk like that. And he's authentic, and he's speaking the truth, and it's refreshing. And I think people are relieved to hear a message that sort of reflects the reality of their personal budgets.
Mm-hmm. I was at the Trump event last Thursday night. It was fascinating.
Interesting.
I mean, from a political science element, it was fascinating. Do you see any balance between Trump and Bernie?
The Daily Show said Bernie is the yin to Trump's racist yang. Seriously, I think that they do tap a similar vein. It's a vein of frustration and anger, and they tap into the deep disconnect that people feel, particularly from the federal government. Obviously, in very different messages, right? Trump much more based in hatred and fear. Bernie in a kind of more positive vision that is sort of empowering and about potential. Where Trump's not that detail oriented, but clearly tapping into something of a similar vein.
Mm-hmm. Would you have protested last Thursday night?
No, not at all. And
Why
the
not?
guy's on the ballot. He's on the ballot. He's coming to have a political discussion with not only Vermonters, but knowing that the media market here feeds into New Hampshire. That's a pretty reasonable thing. I don't protest his arrival.
Let me rephrase the question. Why would you not have participated in the City Hall rally across the street?
Sure, I might well have. I was here and late, and so I got home and hung out with my kids. But yeah, I protest his message. I find a lot of what he says very offensive, and I think he's sort of drumming on the most base kind of instincts of still too many Americans. A real hate-filled message around immigrants, around Mexicans, around all sorts of different strata of people, whether it's religious divisions or racial divisions. I think he tries to fan those fears, and I think that's offensive. But I guess what I mean is I don't have a problem with him coming to Vermont. It's an election. He is on the ballot. It's appropriate.
Right.
I don't think, but then you see his actions with handing out 20,000 tickets for a 1,400 seat theater and cherry picking the audience. It's not a genuine political discussion, which we have grown accustomed to here in Vermont. We're lucky to still have. He totally flies in the face of that, and I think that's unfortunate.
How does a politician like that, if he does, how does that blow out? How does that torch sort of blow out here?
Well, one of the things that, from a political point of view, excites me about Trump is I think while he's bombastic and he's getting a lot of headlines, he does have a limited appeal in the country, and I firmly believe that is well below 15%. He's winning in a 10-way Republican primary, right? He's actually losing to kind of the conventional candidates if you add all of their totals up. So I think he has limited appeal. I think for a lot of people who are not Democrats or Republicans, if Trump's the candidate, they go, well, you know what? I don't share any of those values, so I'm not voting for them. I'm going to vote for the Democrat. I think that's good if you're, hoping for Bernie or Hillary. So that if you want to win the election, I think actually Trump has some advantages to being the Republican candidate if you're interested in not having the Republicans win.
Mm-hmm.
Along the way, I think there's real damage that he does. I think he he allows people to express views that we generally consider taboo, they're very hurtful. Not taboo like old-fashioned, but it's not okay to just say, well, we should ban Muslims. But suddenly Trump's making that okay because he's putting it on the headlines and the media is rolling with it. So I do fear that, but ultimately I think it produces better results for guys like me.
But here's the thing, if he's saying that, and then he's going up in the poll numbers, then there are other people that believe that too.
Of course.
So, you can either have those people not, stay at home and be quiet, or you can have them out in the public and maybe you try to convince them otherwise.
Well, I think you've seen Bernie make a very direct play for some of his supporters, talking about wages and economic issues as only Bernie can, and trying to move the excitement beyond some of the racist, xenophobic kind of statements that he makes. Maybe that will work. I still think there's a limited number of people that are drawn to that message, and I firmly believe it's well under 50% of the country. We'll see. I hope I'm right. George Bush got the most votes. George W. Bush. We got to accept one of his elections. He got the most votes.
I was going to say he didn't get the most votes, but he won.
We got to accept that. It's a possibility, but by and large, I think the country has moved a long way since 2004 when Bush got the most votes, and so I'm hopeful we're not going to repeat similar kind of mistakes. I guess I make a parallel because I never thought somebody like George W. Bush could get elected president, then he was president for 8 years. So I'm humbled by that memory, and I hope we don't repeat it.
We were just talking with Patty Comline. You were leading this effort on the Global Foundries $1 million that they got. What was your beef with that allocation?
Well, when we
especially considering that the fund was pretty much set up for that purpose.
Well, I didn't like the fund being set up. When we wrote the letter, all we knew was that the E-Board was going to meet and allocate enterprise funds. So we didn't know it was for Global Foundries. This is part of the problem, is this whole thing happens under kind of a cloaked process. We just knew they were going to meet and they were going to go into executive session for the purpose of allocating some enterprise funds. That when we authorized the enterprise fund, it was 2 years ago, and the feeling was that this would be quickly used, that the governor had to have it. It was kind of emergency funds, particularly around the IBM plan and the thousands of jobs that go along with it. Now, fast forward, it's 2 years later. First of all, Global Foundries was given $1.4, $1.5 billion by IBM to take over the plant. It's kind of hard to argue that our $1 million under that scenario is meaningful in terms of retaining jobs or building jobs. But the other thing is we have over $50 million budget adjustment happening right now. We have an even larger budget gap heading into the 17 budget. So I think times are changed, and it's reasonable to say, is this the best use of our $1 million? People disagree on that, but a lot of us thought maybe we should look at this again. We quickly got 50 people to sign on to the letter, and hopefully we stimulated some conversation. Obviously, they awarded the money, and it turns out it's going to Global Foundries.
So are you against that, or were you against the process more than anything else?
Well, I would say both. I don't think that these our largest employers are struggling to find capital. Smaller startups, small farms, these guys really struggle to get capital when they need it, and it could make a big difference to their businesses. So I'm much more open to those kinds of taxpayer investments. I just don't think that, again, it's just hard to argue that a company that just was given $1.5 billion to take over the Essex plant is make or break whether or not it has $1 million of tax funds in terms of retaining jobs. I just don't think there's data to support it. I think, you look at Keurig Green Mountain. In the last 3 years, we've given them $10 million of tax credits. They just sold for $14 million. It's questionable whether these are good investments, and we have increasingly limited tax dollars to go around. To me, the biggest companies in Vermont are not where our economic development strategies and dollars should go.
14 billion under Keurig, yeah. But, the argument that the speaker made this morning is it's a signal, it shows you want to have a relationship. What about that?
I think that's valid. I think there's a lot of ways to make those signals, though. And the governor and folks have been, very close to the folks at Global Foundries. They were here at the State of the State address. There's a lot of ways to do that. $1 million, somebody wrote online, this is $1 million thank you card. At the same time, when we're cutting back on reach-up funds and food stamps and shrinking the safety net for state government, to me, that's not where the priority is giving Global Foundries $1 million thank you card.
Mm-hmm. What are you looking to hear next week from the governor on the budget?
Well, I'll be, a lot of what the governor does that I don't like is not spoken about during the budget address. So I'll be keenly listening for what he's not talking about, and then look through the budget and try to understand.
What is that? Tell people what that.
Well, I mean, first of all, he doesn't need to talk about everything in the budget. It's a very lengthy proposal, so he highlights different things. He typically highlights the things that everybody agrees with. It's not a complicated formula to give a speech. But, for instance, there was a cut to reach up last year. This is to waive some income for reach up recipients. So these are people that, are very low income. They've lost their jobs. They've got kids at home, and we're giving them less of a benefit, basically. Mm-hmm. He didn't talk about that in last year's budget address. That was a real sticking point for a lot of us in the budget, as an example. So it'll be a question of priorities. I'll be very keenly interested in what he's proposing around Medicaid. We've got a lot of challenges there, and I serve on the healthcare committee. Yeah. And this impacts, upwards of 150, 200,000 Vermonters. So how those details sugar off are going to matter. Higher ed is always something that I believe we've done less and less of investment in higher ed. That's a problem, I think, for going forward for our future. Different spending priorities around earned sick times, even. The bill that we passed in the House overlooked temporary workers. This is a problem. These are the people at the lowest end of the economic spectrum, typically, who are working temp jobs. And they don't really have a job. They have a job today. So forgetting about them as we try to move forward on earned sick time is a problem to me. It is a budget problem because the state relies on temporary workers, and we don't want to have to pay for them. It'd be great to hear something different on that. How he wants to handle opiates. There's some great ideas. Some of them cost money. Some of them don't need to. I'll be listening closely for things like that. Weatherization, low-income weatherization. This is a great climate initiative. This is great, saving Vermonters money on their home heating bills. We have been at best level funding, actually stepping back our funding over the last 4 or 5 years. It's a big priority for me and folks in the Climate Caucus, which I'm the co-chair of. We'll be listening very carefully for that. There's a lot more, I'm sure, but those are some that come to mind.
Can you do the Medicaid, can you close the gap without either cutting benefits or kind of sticking it to the providers?
That's a big question. We're limited in what benefits we can play with because this is a federal and state program. The feds dictate a lot of it. But in our House Healthcare Committee, we've asked to look at all the optional programs that we cover, how much does it cost. It's a big part of the state budget. So one of the challenges that people need to be aware of is we're right now got a $40 million shortfall in the budget adjustments in the current budget year. $40 million is a lot of money. It's a tiny percentage of the Medicaid budget. So it's sort of, if you were building a building and you were 2%, you were running over 2%, nobody would be surprised. It's just that it's such a big number that a small percentage of being off creates real challenges. And I think that's the reality. I'm not interested in shorting providers. I think we got to make sure that we're actually doing more for our primary care docs in particular. Otherwise, we're going to be in a real crisis in 5-10 years. And the goal for many years has been to have more Vermonters being covered by having health care coverage. Right. So it's a good thing. We got to figure out how to pay for that.
Right. marijuana legislation? Yes.
Big fan.
Big fan? Yes.
I'm the lead sponsor of the House proposal that mirrors Senator Zuckerman's proposal in the Senate. I think it's time. I'm a big fan of legislation reflecting reality. The reality is for 80 to 100,000 Vermonters are using cannabis every month today under an illegal system. There's some $150 million of economic activity every year today in Vermont around cannabis. So we need to bring that above board. We need to be treating it like alcohol and tobacco. There's no compelling reason not to. And I got little kids. I think it's time that we have a framework where we can have a frank and honest discussion with the kids. Right now, the things they're learning in school around marijuana, it's frankly lumped in with other harder drugs, opiates, heroin, so on. They are not the same, and we ought to be able to have a frank conversation that's conducive to reality.
Is the primary motivation for you financial or something else?
I think the primary motivation is reality, dealing with reality. There's certainly some financial implications. Excuse me. I think a lot of us are very worried about the opiate crisis. We're going to need resources to address that, and taxing and regulating marijuana will create some resources to do that. I think that's really important.
Any mixed message there? Senator Campbell thinks that if you're trying to legalize marijuana, you're sending a bad message in the middle of this whole opiate crisis. Says it's not
Actually,
a gateway drug, but that there's a bad,
Well, listen, nobody's saying that everybody in Vermont should run around and use cannabis. What we're trying to say is the war on drugs has not worked. There is rampant marijuana use in Vermont today. We got to deal with that. We got to get it out of the hands of people who are selling marijuana on the street, going up to kids, high schoolers. They make money when they sell it to a high schooler or an adult. And we can change that dynamic, I think, in a properly regulated system. There is no good argument not to treat it the way we treat alcohol and tobacco. Very few of us think that alcohol and tobacco are great things. We have come to accept how we have to treat them in society, and I think cannabis fits in that mold. I don't think that it's a contradiction to say we should tax and regulate cannabis while we address the opiate crisis. Not at all. In fact, there's some increasing evidence that says easier access to cannabis can prevent people from using opiates. As people who have chronic pain, for instance, are finding great results using marijuana to manage their pain. It's terrible. That's where a lot of addiction starts around opiates. It's prescribed opiates. So I don't think it's a contradiction at all.
Mm-hmm. What else is your healthcare committee going to do? Patty Comline was just saying there's still problems with Vermont Health Connect.
We are continuing to get through the Health Connect challenges. A lot of that is, frankly, in the administration's hands right now, but our healthcare committee is constantly monitoring that, making sure we understand what's going on.
This is pathetic, isn't it?
It's discouraging, yeah. I mean, the challenges are fewer and fewer and smaller scale, but the fact is they've been a drumbeat for 3 years, and it's embarrassing. We ought to be able to do this better. They're not unique to Vermont, right? These challenges are happening even at the federal exchange. But
that sounded good like a year ago.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've been embarrassed by it. I've called it a tripartisan embarrassment, and it is. And it's what the damaging impact, in addition to the frustration and Vermonters who've suffered trying to deal with the system, is that it's undermined a lot of faith in state government, particularly around healthcare, which is something we need to keep moving forward on. We can't accept that it's climbing up over 20% of our state economy and just sort of say, well, what are you going to do? Let's just keep it running. I mean, that's totally unacceptable. So we do need to make change, and the Healthcare Connect problems has undermined our ability to do that, no question.
Yeah. So what else are you doing in your committee?
Oh, right. Well, we're looking at prescription drugs. Next week, actually, we'll hear from Congressman Welch on some of the priorities he's pushing in Congress. We're trying to figure out, ways we can, if there are paths for us to control the costs of prescription drugs. And now you have these new drugs coming on the market that offer a lot of promise. They're hugely expensive. They're one of the drivers in our Medicaid budget. But I would say mostly it's Medicaid, trying to get our hands around Medicaid and dig in deep and see if, a lot of the status quo needs to be questioned. The bureaucracy that we have for state government running Medicaid needs to be examined.
Thank you. Appreciate
Always a
your time.
pleasure.
Yeah.